we know that stamp duty is a significant barrier to downsizing. In fact, previous surveys done by downsizing.com.au have shown that around 1 in 3 downsizers are stopped from taking the decision to move out of their family home but into another more suitable over 50s property as a result of stamp duty. So we were very interested to hear this week about a new proposal by the Real Estate Institute of Western Australia to reform stamp duty in that state. It'll be something that it's put before the Western Australian government for its budget, which is coming out next month. And I'm very pleased to announce that joining me on the line from Western Australia is the Deputy President of the Real Estate Institute of Western Australia, Joe White, to talk about their proposals. Joe, welcome to downsizing.com.au.
That's a pleasure, Mark. Good to be here.
Super. So, Joe, can you please explain in a nutshell the stamp duty changes that you're advocating for, which would help downsizers in Western Australia?
Look, certainly. Basically, what we're calling for is a $10,000 rebate for downsizers as they move into a new home. What we're finding is there's a massive amount of stock that we believe is just frozen in the system, where people are living in large houses that are now unsuitable for these people. And frequently these houses are in areas where the properties have been upzoned and those properties are now suitable for redevelopment, but they're not being redeveloped simply because the stock's not being freed up, and there's not enough incentive for these people that want to downsize to get into a more suitable dwelling.
So what I was particularly interested in your analysis as part of your pre-budget submission is that what you've actually found is that, and it's rather counterintuitive, that even if you give seniors a $10,000 stamp duty, the mere fact that they're actually taking the housing decision and there's movement in the housing market means that even though you're cutting $10,000 off their bill, the government could actually make money out of this. Could you explain that to me a little bit more?
It's pretty simple, actually, Mark, when you think it through. Yes, someone who's selling a $500,000 house may get a stamp duty concession moving into, say, a $350,000 unit, but someone still buys that $500,000 house that would be, what, $17,000, $18,000 worth of stamp duty, and still the residual of the tenant they would have bought. There would have still been a small take on that one as well. But if it's freeing up stock that was not freed up in the first place, there's the stamp duty gain on the purchase of that house. Probably more importantly is that a lot of that stock, particularly in our inside the 10-kilometre suburbs, that's now suitable for redevelopment, it's freeing its incentive for the development industry to actually move into that stock and to start redeveloping units in that. So it's the stamp duty that's picked up on the purchase of their house, not the discount that is given on the purchase of the one that they're downsizing to.
So you're in the real estate industry, obviously in Western Australia. I mean, how often do you hear from clients or from your members that people are not willing to make that downsizing move because they're concerned about the stamp duty when they're actually in the new place they're moving into? How much of a factor is it? And what's the end result in Western Australia? From what I can see, some of its suburbs, some of its areas have amongst the highest rate of unused bedrooms in Australia.
Let's pull on that thread first. When we've got 2 people living in a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house and 1 bedroom, 3 bedrooms are not used, then you've got to ask yourself, how can that stock be freed up? That's probably the first point, people living in unsuitable houses. Stamp duty is an incredibly inefficient tax in that what it does is it creates distortions in the market and it works against an efficient allocation of resources. So we're finding that people are living in these big houses when a smaller house would suit them. When you come back to the point of how much of a disincentive is it really, a lot of this, Mark, is anecdotal. In my 31-year career, the first 15 were spent in the glamorous subdivision side of it, that every young agent wants to be in. The second 16 has all been with basically my parents' generation, moving them in and out of unsuitable houses into smaller units. And it's been fascinating. I find that one of the greatest motivators for that age group is they actually want to preserve assets for their kids. They don't want to see, they know that their kids are probably doing it tougher financially than they did themselves. And they're not wanting to frivolously spend $10,000 moving to a house of lesser value. They would rather sit in a house that is perhaps unsuitable, thinking that, well, the kids will actually inherit this, they'll be better off. They're not doing it for themselves. They're a generation that have generally lived their lives helping their families, not living it for themselves. So that $10,000, the way they're seeing that is that's $10,000 that won't help their kids and their grandkids. It's an interesting narrative. It's not quite as I thought. And it's not until you get into the lounge room and you start pulling on these threads that you realise how selfless a lot of these people actually are.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting about the family dynamics and the decisions that get involved in downsizing. Absolutely. So as well, what I'm interested in your pre-budget submission, you've also taken the pretty big policy step of advocating for the government to look at the concept of an annual land tax rather than paying upfront stamp duty. And clearly part of this as well would be aimed to, again, encouraging downsizers to have a different option. It may be because downsizers are only in a property for a shorter period of time than someone raising a family. It could be, I'd imagine, that an annual land tax option, if set at the right price, is something that should be looked at to help with that property movement that you've spoken about.
Yeah, look, there's nothing new about this. Canberra's doing it. New South Wales wants to do it. In fact, the narrative from all the states is they all want to do it, but no one wants to be the person that's responsible for introducing essentially what, in Thatcherism was referred to as a poll tax. That's the political argument that people are considering unpalatable. However, if we can create an option whereby rather than someone, say for argument's sake, my kids go and buy a house that may be in the realm of 500,000, rather than all of a sudden belting them with a $20,000 bill, which at the end of the day is going to be added onto their loan and then is going to have interest compounded on it, so that it is going to be the last part of their loan they're going to pay off. So they're actually borrowing money to pay a tax. It's patently ridiculous. But if they have the option of paying that in equal installments over a period, or paying $1,000 a year, or at least having that option, it can make it a lot easier on their balance sheet of not having to borrow the money to pay the tax, because whether the money's borrowed to pay the tax or it's borrowed to pay the house, the bottom line is it's all coming out of the same bucket of money. So they're borrowing it. You can't get away from that fact. But if we can stretch that out over a longer period and pay an installment, it'll make it a lot more palatable and a lot easier for that generation to get into their homes. But at the moment, it is a big, big fine for someone to pay to move from an area that may be an area of low economic opportunity to move to an area of high economic opportunity. But rather than helping them and perhaps even paying them to make that transition, we actually fine them, Mark. We fine them for wanting to move to areas of high opportunity, which clearly is against all national economic interest.
Yeah. I just wanted to, I noticed that as part of your pre-budget submission, you're also talking about the extension of WA's off the plan stamp duty discount. And from my understanding is that that's something that is due to go to October. It was introduced as an economic stimulus measure by the current state government in Western Australia. I'm just wondering, have you heard a lot of feedback from people saying that, particularly from over 50s, that it's helpful for them to downsize? And clearly, in your view, if it was extended beyond October, it is something that you would support from what I can see.
Look, we haven't got good figures on exactly what effect it's had, but the whole intent of this policy is to encourage more infill, more apartment dwellings, and to encourage a greater diversity of housing, so that the stock that we want people to move to is actually there. And also to encourage a little bit more market research for the developers to actually go and ask the people that, would possibly downsize if the disincentives weren't there, to say, well, what sort of a unit do you actually want to build? And a lot of the feedback we're getting anecdotally there is not just multi-story buildings, it's 2-3 stories, no lifts, no pools, where the actual recurrent costs, the recurrent budgets that people have to live with, as well as the capital budgets of buying it, are low. Because a lot of these people now are finding that their superannuation is not returning what it did 5 or 10 years ago. There's been compression on yield, so they are under pressure. But if we can find these smaller units that aren't in complexes that have expensive ongoing costs, and the typical ones are lifts and pools, that there is a demand for that, but we're not very good at producing that at the moment, Mark. So it's that whole housing diversity debate that we want to stimulate so that we can see more delivery of that sort of a product into the market. And it's one thing wanting people to move from big houses, but you've got to deliver the product that they desire for them to move to. Otherwise, it's a facile argument. If we can't deliver the stock that they want to buy, we can't expect them to move from the house that's still doing this job for them.
Yeah, carry out. So, Joe, do you think there is any chance the government will consider your proposals? If you're a betting person, what would you say? 2 to 1, 10 to 1, 100 to 1? What do you think?
Oh, gee, yeah. Well, I suppose being in this industry, you are a betting person, aren't you? Because if you want to double your success rate in the property industry, you've got to quadruple your failure rate. Look, I believe they'll be looking at it positively. I believe they can see the sense in it, both economically and socially. And at the moment, the iron ore royalties are giving them a pot of gold, a pot of iron ore that they've never had before. So if there's going to be a time, if it doesn't happen now, I believe it's going to be very, very hard to get up in the future. Look, I think we're 50-50 on it getting into the political narrative. And then we're probably 50-50 from there on it getting up. So the first step is we've got to get it into the debate, Mark. If we don't get into the debate, it's not going to go anywhere. So it's very, very important that we peel the layers of the onion back this in a very public policy manner so we can actually discuss the benefits of it. So I think it would be a lie for me to sit here and say I'm totally confident of it getting up. But the feedback we've had is that virtually all sides of politicians can see the sense in it, but no one's had a strong enough mandate to implement it without fear to having looked like the person they raised a poll tax. But at the moment, no one in any state in Western Australia, probably in any era that I can remember, has got a stronger mandate than Mark McGowan. And given that he holds Treasury as well as the Premiership, he is in a position where the ball's at his feet and he doesn't have a goalie in the goals. So there's never been a bigger opportunity.
Yeah, well, as you say, Joe, you've got to raise the flag. You've got to get it out there. If you don't do that, you'll never know. So good luck with your initiative. It's an interesting debate. It's a very detailed pre-budget policy submission, but I guess we find out next month whether the first part of your plan has been successful or not. So, Joe, thank you very much for joining us on downsizing.com.au, giving us a bit of an update of what's happening in the WA market, an idea about some stamp duty policy initiatives. And thank you very much again. It's been great having you.
That's a pleasure, Mark. And listen, good luck over there while you're all locked down. And yeah, I'm certainly not being smug, but I am enjoying the fact that I'm not locked down. So listen, I look forward to that time when your times are a bit better over there. But thanks again.